Hello and welcome to the second episode of Let's Make a Game, where we're working on the project On Edge. Today I'm going to, I think, be working on doing some modeling. So I have some units that I sketched up a while ago that I want to remake, basically. So currently there's a hover tank chassis that I've already made for the world, but it's pretty much programmer art at the moment. It's early rough kind of design for the tank, and it's really ugly right now. Also, because I edited it to make it look weird. I'm going to start by remaking this. It's not that complex of an object, so that'd be a good place to start with. And to do this, I'm going to be using Blender. So first of all, I'm going to go open. I have Unity running here. I'm going to go to the Hover 1 chassis, and then here's the actual model file. I'm just going to open it up. And I could just scrap all this and remake it, but I'm going to use this just to get an idea of what the size looks like, so that it has the same size as the other objects. Basically, I think what I did was one of these squares here, so this grid here, this middle square, that corresponds to about the size of a single tile, and so I'm kind of making this in reference to that. I think that was a conversion. I can't actually remember this moment. Anyway, so what the design looks like is this. It's pretty simple. There's it's pretty flat in the back, and it has a little arch at the top, and then there's really not much to it. It's very low poly, very low. There's not a lot of fidelity in this model. It's mostly because it's we're targeting tablet devices, and at the same time, I don't really have the artistic abilities to make this look decent. So I'm going to keep it simple and go from there. So let's go flip back here to Blender. If you watched my last cast, then you're aware that Blender is my modeling tool of choice for this project, just because it's free and it works very well. To start, I'm actually just gonna, I'm gonna scrap this whole tank here, get rid of that, and get rid of this too. Actually, I'll leave that for now. So this object here, it looks like just basically a set of axes, is what's called an empty inside of Blender, and these are just empty positions, just objects that don't have any sort of they're not visual, they don't have polygons or anything like that, but you can use them to kind of denote positions in your model, and we can use these inside of Unity. So what this is, if I can actually bring this back. This is what I called a damage point. So I named it up here, called a damage point 0. And what I have is inside of the game itself, when you load up a chassis, any type of chassis model, it's going to look through all of the model objects. So you can dig through this tree over here. So in Blender, I'll try to make this a little more apparent. In Blender, you can label objects and make you see a hierarchy of your objects in the scene. So here's the chassis object, which is just this model here, this mesh. And then attached to that, we have my damage point object. This is as a child to that mesh. So when it's a child, that means it's going to be manipulated when I manipulate the mesh. So if I move it over here, you notice the damage point, this black, now it's orange when I select it, but that set of axes will actually move around with it. And so it's attached to the model. And the same thing will continue inside of Unity. When you load up this model, this mesh, and I move around the mesh in the world, this will move relative to the mesh. And what this damage point does is it tells you a position on the model of where to attack. I'm saying if someone's going to shoot at me, if there's some weapon attacking this chassis, or this unit that has this chassis, this is a position that the weapon can shoot at that will make it look like it's actually hitting the chassis, right? So I can define, in the code, I set that you can have up to 5 damage points. And right now it's just damage point 0, so it'll be damage point 0, damage point 1, damage point 2, all the way up to 5, or up to 4, I guess, in that case. And what that allows us to do is to define different random points around the mesh. So when say the laser cannon, for instance, if you watch the last episode, there's these tanks have lasers on them. They shoot just a straight laser beam right at the enemy unit. What it will do is actually it will randomly select a point on the chassis to hit, so it's not always shooting the same position. It's going to choose a random damage point each time it fires a laser. At the moment, I just had this single damage point, so it's always shooting here. Also, what I had, if I look at the animation here, I actually had a hit animation. So here's the hover animation, and then right there, that's the hit animation. It's very simple. It's just like a simple roll. But it's supposed to kind of look like that's the position they hit. I guess it really should have hit like on this side, so it looks like it actually moved that way. But I made the reaction of the animation to look like it actually hit on that side. Now that would be necessary, obviously, when I have multiple damage points. I'm not really going to make the hit animation. I'm not going to make a hit animation for each damage point so it looks that realistic, because it's just a lot of animations to go through and it's kind of unnecessary. You really won't notice in the end. This is so fast you can hardly see it in the game. As long as the unit kind of twitches and there's some sort of visual feedback that it got hit, you'll be fine. No one will be like, oh wow, it hit on this side and it's twitching that way. That looks really weird. Unless it's very apparent. Of course, I say that now. You never know what it'll look like in the end. But for now, I'm not going to worry about that. There'll just be a single animation for bidding damage, but I can still have multiple damage points. So when the laser beam, it may shoot and connect over here or connect back here or whatever else. Also, it's important to note in the code, I made it so that if I forget to add a damage point, it's not going to yell at me, which maybe it should. But what I'll do is it'll fall back onto the default transform, so the base position of the object. So when I have this object selected, notice in Blender there's a little, it's probably really hard to see in the cast, but there's a little orange circle right in the middle, and that denotes the center position of the mesh or the object that you have selected. And basically it will default to this position on any object that I've made. And so it will always just pick that position if there are no damage points defined. But if I have damage points defined, it will never pick that center object. And this is really important for when you have meshes. At the moment, this doesn't really matter because a laser is going to shoot it right there. It will look like it hit the front, and that's not too big of a deal. But for other units, such as the spider unit that I'll be modeling later, it's very important to have these damage points because the center transform could very well be somewhere that's not even near the mesh, not even inside of the mesh. And it'll just look weird if you're like shooting at the ground below them. It doesn't really do anything. But for now, that worked. So what I'm going to do to start out with, again, is just delete this mesh. And I'm going to start fresh. If we look at the design, it's very basic, you know, flat edges. It mostly looks like a box. So I think we'll start with a cube. I think that'd be a good starting point. So let's go back to the back to Blender here. And let's start by adding a cube. So in Blender, to begin modeling, you can use the hotkey Shift A, which allows you to add an object in the world. So as you see, there's a bunch of objects. You can add text, metaballs, surfaces, all sorts of curves, and there's a bunch of meshes here that we're going to work with, and cameras. That's basically Shift A is your hotkey into adding whatever you want. There's also Add menu up here, same thing. I just kind of like using the hotkeys. I definitely recommend getting used to hotkeys when you do it. There's plenty of good tutorials out there if you really like. I'll try to talk about what I'm doing at the time, but if you are feeling overwhelmed with Blender and you're trying to use it in your own project, there's plenty of good video tutorials. I think the website's called CG Cookie, I want to say. I can't remember exactly what it was. I really should put these together and set a set of links or something for everyone. But there's some good tutorials out there. Just Google them, you'll find them. And it's very important to note that I'm using 2.6 of Blender, 2.6.3. You definitely include the version number, at least the major and minor version number, when you're searching for tutorials, because I think between 2.4 and 2.5 there was a UI revision that was pretty major. I never used the old Blender, so I don't really know, but I'm pretty sure that there's some old documentation. You'll find some old tutorials that maybe won't apply as well to what you're trying to do in 2.6. So make sure if you're using the latest version of Blender, always add that in your Google searches, the 2.6 at least, or 2.5 if you are not finding anything for 2.6. Anyway, so I'll start by Shift A. I'm going to select Mesh, make a cube. So there's a giant cube. The first thing I always do, I don't know why, but I always move the transform to 0. So if you don't see this window over here, with an object selected, you can press N. That's N as in Nancy, not Mancy. Just press N, and that brings up the properties for the currently selected object, and it's just kind of a handy thing to have. Also over here is the object tools. I don't want to use that too much. Seems like there's a different window. I'm still trying to discover stuff with Blender. I always fall back to Google and look up whatever I need to. Anyway, I'm going to start by making this a more correct size. So I'm going to go over here to the dimensions, and I forget what 1 looks like. So here's a 1x1 cube. I kind of like that length actually, so I'm going to use that as the length of this object. It will be 1 unit wide, or 1 unit long, but it's definitely too wide. So we'll bring the x coordinate here down, the x dimension down to there, and that looks pretty good. Of course, the z height is really high, so let's bring down the z to 0.25. That looks pretty good. This is kind of how I start most of my modeling. I'm not an expert in Blender, so this is not probably the best way to do things, but I always like to get the dimensions near as possible to what I'm looking for. And even a little smaller than this. This looks kind of silly, that thick. Yeah, let's go for 1.25. 0.15. So I don't really use the, I mean, you can use the scaling or the dragging of these things, but I just ignore that. I kind of like typing in numbers and getting the exact numbers. Okay, so that looks pretty good. It's a good starting point. So if we go back to our model, it looks pretty good. We're going to add, we'll start by editing the shape so it looks a little bit like this. So let's go back to Blender, and in here, to enter edit mode. So obviously I have a cube here, and you can use the various keys to transform this object. So if I press G, that means, I think G for grab, I'm not sure. If you press that, that's basically your way to translate the object throughout the world. So you'll notice up here in the locations, all the numbers are moving. And then when you're translating, like, oh, I don't mean to translate that anymore. I accidentally press G. Just right click. Right click will undo whatever you're trying to do. And you confirm the action by left clicking. So if I move it around, I left click, then it will stay there. So I'm going to hit Control Z, because that's your undo. I always have my hands on the undo key because I'll inevitably screw something up. So G is to translate, R is to rotate, like this, and then S is to scale. So, you know, that's really easy. They all make sense except for the G until you think of grab, so G for grab. Another really useful thing is when you're moving this stuff, I don't really use the widget. Right, it's there, it's kind of nice, you can drag it, just like if this were like 3ds Max, it's pretty familiar to you probably. You can grab the axis to restrain to the axis. What I like to do is just use the hotkeys. So I press G, and it's freeform movement. I can move it wherever, but if I press X, then it locks to the X-axis, and it'll only move along the X-axis. If I press Y, it moves along the Y-axis. If I press Z, it moves along the Z-axis. So that makes sense. It's just really handy if you need to restrain it. And what I do is I always move it in components. So I'm like, okay, well I want it forward and right a little bit, so let me, you know, G and then press Z, move it up a little bit, and then press G and then Y, move forward, just so I get the exact movements. It's not the fastest workflow, but it works pretty well for me. Another thing to note is when you can do the same thing for rotate, right? So I can press X, it'll only rotate on the X-axis, or Y-axis. But if you double tap, so if I press G and then I press Z, press Z again, it's not going to do anything, but what that actually does is now it's moving along the local Z-axis. So let's say I rotate this that way, and I press G, I want to move it, and I say I want to move along the Z-axis. Okay, press Z again, now it's going to move along the Z-axis relative to the object out of this rotation. So this is now the Z-axis local. So I tap it once to go into global, tap it again to go into local, and then tap it one more time to disable the axis constraint. So I'll undo this again. Anyway, so now that we have our mesh, it doesn't look very, or our cube doesn't look very much like our target object, right? It doesn't look like our fancy tank. So let's press tab to go into edit mode. So edit mode, you'll notice that the vertices will highlight, and you'll see it makes the object look a little transparent, so you can see all the lines and the vertices and the edges. So in edit mode, by pressing tab, that's how you get into it. You have some options down here. There's 3 buttons. You can do vertex select, which is default, and allows you to select vertices. That's vertices. You can do edge select, which allows you to select edges. And again, selection is right click. So in Blender, always right click to select things. And then there's face select. And when you do face select, you don't click on the face. So this would be a little bit different if you used to. I think 3ds Max were like this, where you right click on a face and it'll just select our face. You select the little black dots will appear. Those are the faces that you want to select. So that's how you select the face. I want to select this face, I select that black dot right there. I want to select the face down here, click that one. It's really nice because it allows you to do selection through through surfaces. So like there's the top surface, but I can also select the one behind it, even though it's obscured, it's occluded by the top one. So that's kind of it's kind of confusing when you have a lot of faces and there's all these little black dots around, but I'm sure there's some way to work around that. But for a lot of my work, it's not too important to, it hasn't been too much of a hindrance really. So say select things. Another thing that I just realized that we want to do is I look back at the model here. Obviously it's symmetric, so along the I guess we can call this the y-axis that splits this tank in half this way. It's symmetric, so what we can do is actually do some mirror editing. So when I edit this vertex here, it will do the same thing over here. So let me bring back into Blender. To do this, what we can do is, first of all, I like to get the just make it so it's half. So I want it this wide when it's done. So I'm going to select this face, and basically what I want to do is move it over here, right? Just so it's right at 0. Now to get this perfect, up here, the transform tool is no longer the transform of the object when you're in edit mode. It's the transform. See, it says median now. It's the median transform of all the vertices you have selected, or the object. So if I have a face selected, it's the median transform of the faces that are selected. So I can type in 0 here, and now I know it's exactly at 0 on the x-axis, so it's right in the middle. And actually, we can get rid of this face because we don't need it when we're going to be mirroring. So to delete things, you can press, I think delete. Yes, delete will bring that up. Or press X. They're both the same thing. When you press X, it will bring up the delete menu, which says, do you want to delete the vertices, the edges, the faces, with the only edges and faces, whatever else. I have a face selected. I want to just delete that face. So I'm going to select faces, and I'll delete the face. Now, what if I didn't want to do that? I wanted to select delete vertices. What's that going to do? Is I delete vertices. It deleted all the vertices for that face, which meant every other face that had those vertices were also deleted. So what I'm going to do is press X again, delete only the face, because I want to keep this. But we don't need this middle face in here because I'm going to mirror this. So how do I mirror this? I'm going to mirror this over the Y-axis, or I guess X mirror is the default option. So what I'm going to do is, with the cube selected, the thing I want to mirror selected, I can go to the modifiers tab, which is this little wrench at the top, and click add modifier. And I can add a mirror modifier, which sounds perfect. And it just automatically did it. It knew that I wanted to mirror over the x-axis. I can choose y-axis if I wanted to. But you're not going to see it here. It's not going to look very different because we're all at 0. But over the x-axis, it mirrored it exactly over the x-axis. And notice that's relative to the center point here. So if I went in here and I grabbed all the object and I moved it along the x-axis and moved it out, it's relative to that, still relative to this middle point, the orange point of the model. That's what it's going to mirror over. So that's perfect. So that's exactly what we want. And the thing is, what's a little bit different than modifiers, they're not, I guess, different, but what you need to worry about with modifiers is that you keep them active the whole time that you're modeling, and then you just apply them when you're done, because I'm pretty sure otherwise they go away. And I don't know if Unity will properly import with the modifiers. So without applying a modifier, I think it will basically, if I try to import this object right now, it would show up as just this half of the cube. Okay, another thing that's important, or kind of important, there's a cube object, right? I named it cube because I made a cube. So to change the name of an object, you can either double click up here, or you can select the object, then go to the, the object tab, and you can just type the name in here. So I'm going to type the name chassis, because that's the chassis. Okay, so now that we have this, now I can model this object in perfect symmetry. So to show you an example of what this means, I can go and in vertex mode, if I want to move this vertice, I can select it with right click and press G, move along the x-axis, and notice it moves on both sides. So now I can ensure that my object will be exactly the same on both sides, will be perfectly symmetric. So the next thing we need to look at is the actual model itself. So right now we're dealing with only 6 vertices in our, or 8 vertices in our cube. And we need to basically add some more vertices because there's a lot more detail we have to add here. Or not a lot, because it's not that fancy, but for instance, up here we need to have this little arch up here, and we only have a vertice basically for the back corner, the bottom corner, and front corner. And also we need to have this little slice up here in the front, so it's kind of curved in. So to do that, we need to add some more vertices to our object. So back here in Blender, we're going to first of all do we'll slice this. So this may not be the best way to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's kind of the way I'm familiar with at the moment. So with the object selected and in edit mode, you can press Control R, and that brings up this little purple square thing, or I guess loop. And if you move over various edges, you'll see this loop changing. This purple guide will change, and it's showing you how it's going to slice it. Basically, what it's going to do is add a slice here, and or not slice in the sense that it's going to divide the model, but it's going to add these vertices here in these corners. And it's going to say, oh, you're going to add a slice here. So that's how I'm going to add some detail to the model for just the polygons that I need, just to get the vertices that I really need in my model. So to start, I think we'll add one here. And then what you do, so you click the first time when you see the thing, and then what you can do is you can move it. So you say, how far away do I want, where exactly do I want these vertices? So I want them about there. And what I'm trying to do is add it so I can grab this corner here and move it in so I can add that little rounded edge. The other thing we need is one over here so we can add that corner. So let's add another, and press Control R again. And this time I do want this loop here, so I'm going to click to add it. I'm going to drag it over here, and put it about there. So now what I can do is grab this vertice, and I can grab this one. So to grab multiple vertices, you hold down Shift and then right click. That's how you select multiple things in Blender. Just hold down Shift. It's pretty similar to a lot of other applications. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press G and X to reach to the X-axis. Going to move it in a little bit. And I can press G and Y to go to the Y-axis and move it just a tad bit into. Actually, you know what I'll do? I'll just leave it like this and move it in further. Okay, so that kind of added that little little corner that I had in the slice in the beginning. One thing I don't like is that I want this slice to actually be more further in, but if I do that, so if I grab it and press X, it's going to intersect with the other polygons. So what I'm going to do is grab this corner, and this corner, and this corner, holding Shift the whole time. Press G and press X, and I can move it in a little further. Okay, so we get something like that. It's kind of basic. So now let's say I can grab these two corners. I'm going to move them back a little bit, so maybe it sticks out if it's too flat like that. I can move them like that. Another way to select multiple things using a window, like a selection box with your mouse that you do. Normally you hold left click and drag to make a selection box. You can do is press B, and you press B and it brings up this little arrow cursor thing. So you press B, and then you can drag a box around the things you want to select. So it's like that. I sometimes get some really weird results with that selection box. It will select things that I'm not expecting it to, and so you gotta be a little careful. Sometimes it's kind of annoying. Another handy shortcut is to press A, and that will deselect or select all. So that will deselect anything that's selected if there's something selected, or if you press it again, it selects everything. And it's kind of nice. What I do is like to clear out all my selections. When you press B, if I drag a box here, and then I press B again, and I drag a box here, it's going to keep adding to the selection. So I'm not having to hold Shift. It won't do that. You don't have to hold Shift when you do that. But it's important to remember, because what it'll do is I'll be like, oh, I want to grab these and move them this way. And now I want to grab these, and I want to move them this way. But then I realize, oh, wait, it's grabbing the other ones I had too. So it's important to, what I always do is just press A couple times till I see everything be selected to make sure that I don't have anything selected. It becomes more important when you're working with I noticed that I have a problem for some reason when I'm working with UVs to do that. Anyway, so now we have the front kind of rounded edge. We also need to add that back part of the tank here that kind of that's lifted up, I guess. So what we'll do is add another slice. So I'm going to press Control R. I do want it around this again, so I'm going to select there. And I cannot see what I'm doing, so I'm going to undo that. I want to see how far back I'm going to add this. I'm going to press R again, and I'm going to do it about there. That's pretty good. Okay, so that'll be the back. What we'll do is raise up this back part so that it looks different. So let me go into face mode and select these two faces, and I can press G and Z and bring them up. So again, you're seeing right here, this is not what we want, right? We don't want to lift the whole thing up like this. What we want to do is just bring a slight incline on it. So what I'm going to do again is press R, Control R, add another slice. I'm going to add about there. I'm going to select the faces again, these guys, and press G and Z, and there. Now we're adding just a little incline to the front. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Obviously it's not the prettiest tank in the world. One thing I don't like about it is that it is too wide, and this won't be too much of a problem if I decide I just want to scale it. So I can press S and then X to scale it on the X-axis. I can scale it down a little bit and make it look a little sleeker. It's kind of ugly. Alright, so there's our basic tank shape. So let's go back to the drawing again and see what else we need to add. So another thing is that there's a slope on the inside, so we need to bring these vertices in. And they're all even too. So let's go ahead and go back to the back to the tank. I can edit mode again by pressing Tab. So what I'm going to do is grab these bottom vertices. So let's go back to we have to go back to vertex mode. I think you can press Shift. What is it? Control Tab. Yeah, Control Tab. So if you're tired of going down here and selecting these buttons, you press Control Tab. It brings up the mesh select mode right where your cursor is. And I'm going to select vertex. Another thing to remember is save. So Control S will save, just like any other program, or you can go to File and save. It's kind of weird though. You press Control S, it doesn't just save. It says make sure you confirm it, so it'll bring up the menu right at your mouse. You just click it, and it will save. Anyway, select these vertices, holding down Shift to select. Let's just grab these front ones for now. And what we'll do is press G and move along the Y-axis. Oops, what's going on? Okay, G and then Y. Interesting. Okay, so that's not working. Oh, did I lock these? Hey. So I probably hit some key that I wasn't meaning to. And inevitably this always happens to me when I'm working on something. So let's try... What did I do? Huh. I've never actually experienced this before. So I will look this up. Oh, is there a snap on? Is that what I did? There it is, okay. So I think I had the snap so that it snapped to the grid. Yeah, that's what I did. So down here is this little magnet. It's trying to snap to the grid so it doesn't move until I make a large move. There it is. So I move really far, and it moves out like that. Anyway, so let's turn that off because that's just dangerous. I don't want that on at all. So let's grab these vertices again. Press G to move along the Y-axis. Press Y. I was going to move them in just like that. Boom. So that just looks absolutely horrible. So let's see. Let's select this guy. G along the Y-axis. Yeah. Okay. Let's grab all these vertices down here in the bottom front. Let's press G. Oops. G then Y, and move it in a little bit. Give some shape there. There we go. That's looking better. Okay. So now it's looking a bit better, a bit more like the concept. Let's give it a perspective view here. Model, art, model, art. I kind of like this. This is part of my bad drawing, but it kind of looks like my poor drawing skills not doing this justice. But it kind of looks like the top kind of bends in. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to see what that looks like. So let's go back to Blender here, and I'm going to select these top vertices. Press G and then press X to lock to the X-axis, and that is not at all what I was looking for. The reason it's doing that is that I don't have a vertice, so I'm grabbing these holes, moving the whole face on the side here. So what I'm going to do is add another loop, and this loop is going to run this way. And whoa, there we go. I'm going to add that. Well, it's kind of a problem. I'm going to add it. Oops, no, darn it. Undo, Control R, add it there, move it up. And what I'm going to do is grab these, and I'm going to first move them so that they are in line with this lowest one here, this guy. I'm going to grab all these and move them up. I'm sure there's an easier way to do this. I have not spent a lot of time with the mesh editing tools, and so this loop thing is pretty much the only thing I've used so far. Anyway, I'm going to grab these top guys again. I'm going to press G and then X and move it in a little bit. That's kind of nice. Adds a little more shape, a little more detail to the model. It's a little more appealing rather than just a box. I'm going to grab these guys and move this in as well and see what that does. Ooh, yeah, that looks better. A little more interest to the model. Cool. I may leave it as that for now. It's pretty basic. Okay, let's go back to the rendering, or the concept art. So again, there's these little lower parts on the model. They get drawn over here, but they're there, and this is basically the hover track part of the tank. So what I'm going to do is add these. So let's go back into our Blender, and what I'm going to do is we actually have, there's a slice here. So there's some faces right along, oops, on this edge. Again, you can hold Shift and right click to select these faces. And I'm going to see what this looks like if I extrude them. So extrusion is a very important part of editing. It just basically extends the polygon along its normal. And so what I'm going to do is have these objects selected. I'm going to press E to extrude. It's going to lock it by default to the Z-axis, to where the normal axis is, or to its normal, not the Z-axis, sorry. And then you can just pull it down and see what it looks like. So I'm going to pull it down a little bit, and there is the extruded